Stone Brothers production.
Hello, welcome back to the Serial Killers series. Unfortunately, I'm skipping over Iowa because I couldn't find any serial killers I had killed there. Today, me and my brother will be talking about 5 serial killers in Kansas.
Number 5. Francis Nemecheck. Francis Nemecheck was born on June 29, 1950. Though there's not much on his early life, around the age of 24, he was in a divorce with his wife, and he did not take it that easy. Francis fought with his wife about visitation rights and went down a path of violence that he could not stop. His first 3 victims were Cheryl Young, age 21, who was separated from her husband, her 19-year-old friend, blonde-haired Diane Lovett, and Young's son, Guy Young, who was 2 years and 10 months old. On December 13th, he shot out their tire on I-70 near Ogalla and abducted them because Young reminded him a lot of his wife from how she looked. Francis drove his victims to a 2-story farmhouse that had been vacant for 35 years, which was a really secluded area 15 miles north of I-70. Nemecheck took the women up a rickety staircase to the 2nd floor, where he raped one or both, then killed them with blasts from his 12-gauge shotgun. While this was occurring, Young's 2-year-old son was scared and escaped outside and froze to death because of Francis's actions. Soon after, Francis played a game of cat and mouse in his pickup truck on a family of 4. He drove up past them after and set up a spot with a sniper, shooting at the family with 4 .22 caliber bullets. 1 bullet hit a hubcap, 2 struck the front driver's side door, and another hit the rear driver's side door, lodging it in the back seat. Luckily, no one in the vehicle was harmed, and they drove to Hayes, reporting the sniper attack. They gave a detailed description of the truck Francis was driving. Eventually, investigators charged Francis with firing the shots. Francis was then set free on a $20,000 bond, and his trial was set for September 1976. Investigators found it curious that the sniper attack was around the same area where Lovett and the Youngs disappeared. Unfortunately, they were unable to link Francis to the triple murder, though authorities kept a close eye on him. Francis stayed under the radar for a few months before he would kill again. Francis exposed himself to a university student named Carla Baker and forced her into his truck, attempting to rape her because of her scolding him. She kicked him between the legs, which forced Francis to put a knife to her throat, stating, "You will never do that again." Carla's father found her bike the next morning lying in weeds alongside the country road, though her body was unaccounted for. His next victim was 16-year-old Paula Fabrizius, who was a cheerleader at Ellis High School. She worked as a part-time rangerette and was supposed to work in pairs, but a shortage of employees forced her to work alone on Saturday, August 21st, 1976. About 6 p.m., she was abducted by Francis, and he took her to his father's farm, which was 30 miles from her work. He took her to a shed on his father's land, but it was locked, so he took her to an area near Castle Rock and raped her. Paula said her dad would get him for what he had done and hit him with a rock. He stabbed her 8 times with a hunting knife, cutting her hands as she tried to defend herself. She was killed by a stab to her heart, and Francis stabbed her in her groin area after she had died. He dumped her body off a 25-foot embankment soon after. Paula's body was found the next morning and found a thumbprint that belonged to Francis on a warranty card for Citizens Band Radio. On August 24, 1976, agents questioned Francis and quickly jailed him in connection with the murder of Paula. Investigators also found Carla's body on the south edge of Cedar Bluff Reservoir. Investigators also received a confession from a fellow inmate that he had admitted killing Paula, Carla, Lovett, and Young. Later, he told investigators himself that he had killed those women and tried pleading innocent by reason of insanity when he went to trial in February 1955. Eventually, Francis was charged with all 5 victims and received 5 life prison terms. He has been denied parole 2 times, stating that he is a changed man and believes God changed his outlook on life. Francis is up for parole in 2027, though he will be near 80 years old when that date hits. Number 4. Edward J. Adams. Edward J. Eddie Adams was born in 1887 on a farm in Hutchinson, Kansas as W. J. Wallace. Edward's father died when he was young, and his mother remarried, setting the stage for a lifetime of psychological problems. Edward had picked up a barber trade and moved to Wichita, Kansas in the early 1900s. There's when he met John Callahan and quickly became involved in bootlegging, petty robberies, and car theft. He had a charismatic nature to him and attracted an extensive line of criminal hanger-ons and loose ladies. His wife left him due to this and growing wary of his illegal activities. He soon formed a gang and robbed banks throughout Kansas and the Midwestern states, earning a reputation as a premier bandit in the early days of Prohibition. In 1920, through Callahan, Adams formed a partnership with outlaw brothers Ray and Walter Majors. On September 5th, they attempted a daylight robbery against a notorious Kansas City gambling den on Grand Avenue owned by Harry Truesdale. Instead of a successful robbery, there was a shootout between the bandits and tough employees of the illegal casino. Unfortunately, a gambler named Frank Gardner was killed by stray bullets which flew in his direction. Adams and the gang were captured by police soon after. Adams was sentenced to life imprisonment in February 1921. His partners received lesser sentences by agreeing to a plead guilty to a robbery which they only had to serve 5 years for. Both brothers died eventually while behind bars, and a third brother escaped the scene only to later be arrested serving time in the Delaware Penitentiary. While Adams was being transported to the Missouri State Prison, he escaped custody after jumping off the train. Within several days after his escape, Adams joined Julius Finney in the robbery of a bank and general store in Cullison, Kansas. He was captured yet again after crashing a stolen car under a bridge and was sentenced to 10 to 30 years at a Kansas state prison, in addition to his life sentence in Missouri for murder. Soon after incarceration, Adams once again successfully escaped imprisonment after sabotaging the prison power plant. He also scaled the prison walls during the night along with inmates Frank Foster, George Weisberger, and D.C. Brown. The driver who assisted in their escape was a World War I veteran gone bad. Adams formed a new gang soon after named Adams Gang. By September of that year, the gang robbed around $10,000 from banks in Rose Hill and Hayesville, Kansas. During the Hayesville robbery, Adams pistol whipped an 82-year-old James Neville for no apparent reason, who later died of a fractured skull. The gang had a few close calls, though Adams killed C.J. Jones after escaping in a stolen car owned by Sheriff E.J. West. While heading to Wichita, the gang went on a crime spree, robbing 11 stores in Muscatah, Kansas, and other various crimes, including burning down motorcycles owned by officers of the law. Back in Wichita on November 5, 1921, Adams shot and killed patrolman A.L. Young in cold blood while he was on duty because they had mutual love interests of the same woman. The gang then committed their most successful robbery yet with a theft of $35,000 after robbing a Santa Fe Express train near Ottawa, Kansas. Adams, his posse, and 2 prostitutes were joyriding around Wichita at high speeds when 2 motorcycle policemen spotted them and attempted to pull them over. Adams shot out at the police from his vehicle, killing patrolman Robert Fitzpatrick, and the outlaws sped away, releasing the women they had kidnapped. They fled south into Cowley County, and later that night, the trio ran out of gas and stopped at a farm, where Adams attempted to steal a vehicle from farmer George Oldham. When Oldman resisted, Adams shot and killed him, stealing his car, while one of the members of his gang fled at night, and there were only 2 of them left. The next day, Adams and Billy Fentelman went to McFarland's house to look for him, who was the member of his gang that fled that night. When they arrived at his house, they ran into 2 officers of the law waiting at his house. Adams shot at one officer who did not die, and the other officer hid under a bed while Adams once again escaped. He hid out until the funeral of a fallen officer he killed, where he assumed the bulk of the police force would be present. He had planned to rent a car and leave town for good. Unfortunately, the proprietor of the garage he was renting at recognized him and contacted the police. 3 officers arrived on the scene, and Adams shot at them, fatally wounding Detective Charles Hoffman, who pulled him on the ground. Afterwards, Adams continued to shoot at the other two officers who were also hit by gunfire from Adams. Adams' downfall happened when D.C. Stuckey, another officer hiding behind a pillar, shot Adams 3 times and killed him. Eddie Adams' body was publicly displayed in the city undertaking parlor in a grisly celebration of the end of a reign of terror. More than 9,000 people viewed the slain outlaw. 18 other people who associated themselves with Adams were arrested as accomplices. 4 were sent to the Kansas penitentiary. Frank Foster was sentenced to life. During Adams' crime spree, he died at the age of 34, killed 7 people, including 3 Wichita policemen, in just a little over a 14-month span, while wounding at least a dozen others.
Number 3. John Robinson, aka the Internet Slave Master. Robinson was born in Cicero, Illinois, being the third of 5 children from an alcoholic father and controlling mother. Later that same year, he enrolled at Quigley Preparatory Seminary in Chicago. It was a private school for inspiring priests, but he dropped after a year due to disciplinary problems. In 1961, he enrolled at Morton Junior College to become a medical x-ray technician, but dropped out after 2 years. Robinson then moved to Kansas City in 1964 and married Nancy Jo Lynch, who gave birth to their first child in 1965. In 1967, they had a daughter named Kimberly, and then in 1971, they had twins named Christopher and Christine. Robinson was first arrested in Kansas City in 1969 after embezzling $33,000 from a medical practice of Dr. Wallace Graham. He was sentenced to 3 years probation for that crime. From the early 1970s to the early 1980s, he was arrested multiple times for embezzlement, fraud, and other similar charges. Robinson claimed joining the secret sadomasochism cult called the International Council of Masters. The cult's duties included luring victims to gatherings to be tortured and raped by the cult members. In 1984, Robinson started 2 fraudulent shell companies, and he hired 19-year-old Paula Godfrey to work as a sales representative. Godfrey told family and friends that Robinson was sending her away for training. Her parents filed a missing persons report after hearing nothing further from her. Robinson was questioned by police, and he denied any knowledge of her whereabouts. Days later, her parents received a typewritten letter with her signature at the bottom, and they thanked Robinson for his help. Her letter stated that she was okay and she did not want to see her family. In 1985, Robinson went under the alias name John Osborne, meeting up with Lisa Stassi and her 4-month-old daughter Tiffany at a run-down women's shelter in Kansas City. He promised her a job in Chicago, an apartment, and a daycare with her baby, but made her sign several sheets of blank letter paper. Robinson contacted his brother and sister-in-law, who was unable to adopt a baby through traditional methods, and he told him that he knew of a baby whose mother had committed suicide. They went to meet up with Robinson 2 days later in Chicago to pay $5,500 in phony lawyer fees and signing forged adoption papers. They received the 4-month-old baby, and Robinson walked away with a sizable chunk of money. In 1987, 27-year-old Catherine Clampett left her parents in Wichita Falls, Texas, and moved to Kansas City in hopes to find a job. Robinson hired her, promising her that she could travel with her work and a new wardrobe. Unfortunately, she vanished in June of that year, and her missing persons case remained open. From 1987 to 1993, Robinson was incarcerated for multiple fraud convictions and parole violations in Kansas and Missouri. While at Western Missouri Correctional Facility, he met 49-year-old Beverly Bonner, the prison librarian. She left her husband after Robinson persuaded her for better work in Kansas. Robinson arranged alimony checks to be forwarded to a Kansas City post office from Bonner's mom. Her family never heard from her again, even though Bonner's mom continued sending checks for multiple years. By the mid-1990s, Robinson became familiar with the internet and became popular in the BDSM online chat rooms. In late 1997, he became acquainted online with a freshman at Purdue University named Isabella Lewicka. She was a Polish immigrant living in north-central Indiana with her parents that were university professors. Still in late 1997, Isabella told her parents that she was dropping out of school to move to Kansas City, where a rich entrepreneur had offered her an internship. She had signed a 115-page slave contract with Robinson, which she didn't tell her parents about. She never returned home, but she continued to email her parents. In 1998, Isabella registered at a local community college as Isabella Robinson. Robinson gave her a ring and paid for her marriage license, even though he never picked it up. By summer of 1999, Isabella told her friends that she and Robinson were going on a trip. She told her friends that she'd be gone for a long time, but she was never heard from again. Robinson told a web designer that he employed that she had been caught smoking and she was deported back to her country. Robinson found many victims online to be a submissive slave, hiring few for work and murdering some of them from the mid-1990s to 2000. Robinson became very careless over time and did a very poor job hiding his tracks from authorities. By 1999, authorities got his attention in both Kansas and Missouri as his name popped up in more and more missing persons investigations. Robinson was arrested on June 2, 2000 at his farm near Los Signa, Kansas after 2 women filed sexual battery complaints against him. Police task force searched his premises and found the decaying bodies of 2 women. They were later identified as Isabella Lewicka and Suzette Trowen, both being found in 85-pound chemical drums. Across the state line in Missouri, other members of the task force found Robinson's rented 2 garages. They found 3 similar chemical drums containing 3 more corpses. They were later identified as Beverly Bonner, Sheila, and Debbie Faith. All 5 victims were killed in the same way, by 1 or 2 blows to the head with a blunt object. In 2002, Robinson stood trial in Kansas for the murders of Suzette Trowen, Isabella Lewicka, and Lisa Stassi, along with other multiple charges. After the longest criminal trial in Kansas history during that time, Robinson was convicted on all counts. He received the death penalty for the murders of Trowen and Lewicka and a life sentence for Stassi. Robinson also received a 5 to 20-year prison sentence for interfering with the parental custody of Stassi's baby. He also received 20.5 years for kidnapping Trowen and 7 months for theft. He faced other legal problems in Missouri where prosecutors were actively pursuing additional murder charges based off the evidence they found there. In 2005, he admitted responsibility for 5 additional homicides across a river at a trial in Kansas City, Missouri. Robinson got a deal for receiving multiple life convictions without the chance of parole after admitting to the homicides there and avoiding more death sentences. As of 2017, with 8 murder convictions across both states, Robinson remains on death row in Kansas. Robinson still to this day is considered being the internet's first serial killer. Number 2. Dennis Rader, aka the BTK Killer. Rader is the oldest of 4 children, being born to Dorothea and William Rader. He was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas, but grew up in Wichita. According to many reports and from his confession, he tortured animals as a child. Rader had sexual fetishes with women's underwear, stealing underpants from his victims and wore them. Rader served in the U.S. Air Force from 1966 to 1970, being stationed in Turkey, Greece, Japan, and South Korea. He married Paula Dietz on May 22, 1971 and had 2 children with her. In 1973, Rader earned his associate's degree in electronics at Butler County Community College in El Dorado. He then got his bachelor's degree in administration of justice at Wichita State University in 1979. From 1974 to 1988, Rader worked at the Wichita-based office of ADT Security Services, where he installed security alarms as part of his job. In many cases, Rader installed security alarms for homeowners concerned about the BTK killings. Rader was living a double life during his career, committing all his crimes in Kansas. He first struck in 1974 with the brutal slaying of 4 members of the Otero family. The 4 members of the family were the mother, father, and their 11 and 9-year-old children. The children and the father were suffocated to death with plastic bags over their heads. The mother, Josephine, was found hanging from a drain pipe in the house. It was Otero's 3rd teenage son, Charlie, who discovered his family members' bodies when he came home from school on January 15, 1974. The BTK killer claimed his next victim being 21-year-old Catherine Bright on April 4, 1974. She was found stabbed in her home and later died at the hospital. He stopped killing nearly 3 years before striking again in March of 1977 when he entered the home of 24-year-old Shirley Vienne. Rader locked Vienne's children in the bathroom and strangled her to death. Later that year, he choked to death another young lady. By this time, the city of Wichita was on edge, with every man and woman in the city fearing for themselves and their children's safety. The BTK killer wore this mask to hide his face during his murders. He would send taunting letters to police and newspapers claiming responsibility under BTK for his heinous crimes. BTK stands for Bind, Torture, Kill, which was his infamous signature. A little after his December 1977 murder, the killer even called the police to report the crime himself. It was obvious he loved the media attention he received and he enjoyed messing with the investigators who were on the case. After 1977, the BTK killer waited almost 8 years before he killed again. Rumors percolated that he had died or been in prison on other charges during his absence. Unfortunately, those rumors were put to rest on April 27, 1985, when 53-year-old Maureen Hedge was found strangled to death in her home in Park City, which is a suburb of Wichita. He struck again 2 more times in the coming years, strangling women in 1986 and 1991. The killings then stopped permanently, and detectives found themselves in a cold case that seemed to have no solid clues. In early 2005, Rader finally made a mistake that got him caught after leaving a cereal box in the back of a stranger's pickup truck at a local Home Depot. The owner of the truck was thinking it was trash and had thrown away the cereal box. Rader was starving for attention and contacted local news station about the cereal box that he had left in the truck. Police were able to track down the box, which is filled with documents detailing future murders that Rader was planning to commit. The authorities found one document asking police a question saying would the killer be able to communicate with police via a floppy disk. The note then said, to be honest, if police agreed, they were to put a specific message in the local classified ads. The police then thought this might be their best shot at finding the serial killer. They then placed an ad telling the BTK killer that they would be unable to track him down, which is a lie, of course. On February 16, 2005, a floppy disk was mailed to a local TV news station. When they examined the disk, police were able to find a file on it saved by someone named Dennis. The file had been used at a Christ Lutheran church and at the Park City Library. Authorities found out that Dennis Rader was the president of the congregation at the Christ Lutheran Church and that he lived in Park City. Authorities quickly compared his DNA to evidence left at the various crime scenes throughout the years. After the results came back, there was no doubt that Dennis Rader was the BTK killer. Dennis Rader was arrested on February 25, 2005. Rader was reportedly shocked that detectives would lie to him about not being able to find the floppy disk. On June 27, 2005, during his trial, Rader gave a long graphic confession detailing 10 murders he committed between 1974 to 1991. On August 18, 2005, Dennis Rader was given 10 life sentences with a minimum of 175 years for the 10 murdered victims. Rader was moved to the El Dorado Correctional Facility a day after his sentencing. Rader avoided the death penalty because Kansas had no death penalty at the time of the murders. To this day, the 73-year-old Dennis Rader sits in solitary confinement for his protection. Since the beginning of 2006, he was allowed access to television, radio, magazines, and other privileges for his good behavior, which is very lucky for this terrible serial killer. Number 1. The Bender Family, aka the Bloody Benders. John Bender Sr. was around 60 years old and spoke very little English. He's either from Germany or Netherlands and is thought by some to be born with the name of John Flickinger. Elvira Bender, who also spoke very little English, was 55 years of age and was so unfriendly that her neighbors called her a she-devil. Before being with John, she claimed to be married to Simon Mark and had 12 children with him. Elvira was suspected of killing many of her past husbands, but none of these rumors were ever proven. Their son John Bender Jr. was around 25 years old with reddish-brown hair and a mustache. He spoke fluent English but with a German accent. Many considered him to be a half-wit because he was prone to laugh aimlessly. Kate Bender, who was around 23 years old, was very attractive and spoke English very well with very little of an accent. She was a self-proclaimed healer and gypsy. The male Benders were widely believed to be German immigrants and was born overseas. There are no documentation or legal proof of their relationships to one another. At first, the family appeared to be normal, living in Labette County in Kansas City in the early 1870s. They didn't appear to be anything special and considered at first to be just another immigrant family that escaped the confines of the eastern cities to try their life out west. The Bender family built a cabin that was divided into 2 areas with a curtain. The front of the cabin was for running a small store and a public inn for travelers. The back part of the cabin was where the family lived. Their cabin had a convenient location just off the Osage Trail, now known as Santa Fe Trail. The trail was a very popular route for travelers, so a lot of people stopped at their cabin on their way out west. They were followers of the newfound spiritualism movement. Kay was the family superstar, being well known for performing shows that showed off her psychic abilities. Her shows drew customers to the inn, and many customers were men who usually traveled alone, often spending the night. All was not what it seemed, though, in this windswept corner of southeastern Kansas. Historians suspect that the Benders were not actually related and not even named Bender. Neighbors claimed that brother John and sister Kate were not siblings, but secret lovers, being husband and wife. The trail was considered a dangerous place, with many travelers who went missing on their way out west because of bandits, accidents, conflicts with Native Americans, or disease. Over the course of a few years, historians claim that many people who happened to pass through Labette County were never to be seen again. Historians claim that the Bender family killed as many or more than 11 people from 1871 to 1873. The Bender family's killing method would be to find male guests who were wealthy. Then they would give the victim a seat of honor at the table with their back against the curtains that is positioned over a trapdoor. Kate would then distract the guests with a show that showed off her psychic abilities. While distracted, one of the benders would come from behind the curtains and strike the guest in the right-hand side of the skull with a hammer. Soon after, the victim's throat would be cut by one of the lady benders to ensure his death. The body was then dropped through the trapdoor. Once the victim's in the cellar, the benders would strip the body of their valuables. The victim would later be buried somewhere on the property, often being in the orchards. Their first known victim is Mr. Jones on May of 1871, with his body being found in a drum creek. Mr. Jones had a crushed skull and his throat was slit open. The benders killed many people, and it all changed when they killed a well-known doctor from Independence, Kansas named Dr. William York. In spring of 1873, he went looking for George Launcher and his daughter. They were resettling in Iowa in winter of 1872, but they were never seen again. In winter of 1872, they were resettling in Iowa, but they were never seen again. Dr. William York was looking and questioning homesteads along the trail. He went to Fort Scott and began the journey to Independence, but never arrived home. Dr. York had two brothers, one named Colonel Ed York living in Fort Scott, and Kansas Senator Alexander York, who lived in Independence. Both of his brothers knew of his travel plans, and when he failed to return, they did an all-out search for him. Colonel Ed York led an investigation in Labette County. When he questioned the benders, they denied all knowledge of York's disappearance. Around the same time of the investigation, the township had a meeting at the Harmony Grove school grounds, and both male benders were there. The townsfolk decided to search every homestead for evidence of missing people. The weather turned bad during that time, and it was a lot of days before the search could start. Eventually, a neighbor noticed farm animals wandering on the benders' property, starving. When he investigated the cabin, he found out the benders had been missing. The volunteers later arrived for the search, noting that the bender's wagon was gone with very little been taken from the home besides food and clothes. All seemed normal at first with just an empty house until someone opened up a trap door in the floor. What they found in the foul-smelling cellar was very chilling. When they got to the cellar, it was drenched with blood and the group was horrified. They soon lifted the cabin from its foundation and dug into the ground but found nothing. They then searched in the garden, which was freshly plowed, and neighbors recalled that the garden had always seemed to be freshly plowed. They dug into the night, and the volunteers first found York's body in the ground. His head had been smashed with his throat slit open. Soon after, they uncovered more bodies with similar injuries. The estimate number of bodies being found from the site is believed to be around a dozen victims. In all, some historians believe the benders could have killed as many as 21 people. A man named Mr. Wetzel heard about the investigators' theory on how they killed, remembering a time when he had been in the inn and declined to sit in their designated spot near the curtain. His decision made Elvira Bender mad and abusive towards him. When he saw the male benders come from behind the curtains, Wetzel and his companion decided to leave. Brother Senator York offered a $1,000 reward for the benders, and the governor added another $2,000, but the reward was never claimed. Many newspapers and books were published about these murders all over the country. Years after the famous crime, many women were arrested as Ma, which Elvira went by, or Kate. Several vigilante groups claimed to have found the benders and murdered them, but none of them brought back proof. Authorities would go on searching more than 50 years without finding them. Some people claim seeing them, but there is no definite proof. The benders were never seen again, and today nothing remains to indicate the exact location where the benders' cabin stood. After more than 140 years, we will probably never know what really happened to the Bloody Benders. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share, and subscribe because your support helps me continue these videos. Next state on our list is Kentucky. I will be doing a video in the future on Iowa mass murderers and spree killers. Stay tuned for future videos, and I'll see you next time.